next speaker, thank you, is Iman Ibrahim Kazarouni, and he works with the Muslim community.
Well, I think the situation in Gaza is among one of those situations that really one fails to find a language to properly express what's going on. However, some reports, not from the US media, from media around the world, clearly indicates the depth of the crisis. And I was researching, I came across Andrea Becker's article, which was in Monday, 24th of November, last month. It says, the title, The Slow Death of Gaza. It has been 2 weeks since Israel imposed a complete closure of Gaza after a month when its crossing have been open only for the most minimum of humanitarian supplies. Now it is even worse. 2 weeks without United Nations food trucks for the 80% of the population. In practice, Israel's blockade means the denial of a broad range of items: food, industrial, educational, medical, deemed not essential for the population, largely unable to be self-sufficient at the end of a decades of occupation. And then she goes on and on to explain the consequence of this blockade, but the most poignant of her report is what's happening in the hospitals. Consider Gaza's hospital staff. In hospitals, the blockade is as seemingly benign as doctors not having paper upon which to write diagnostic results or prescription, as sinister as those seconds between power cut and generator start, when a child on a life support doesn't have the oxygen of a mechanical ventilator. A nurse on a neonatal ward rushes between patients battling the random schedule of power cuts. A hospital worker tries to keep a few kidney dialysis machines from breaking down by farming spare parts from those that already have. By reducing the population to survival mode, the blockade robs people of the time and essence to do anything but negotiates the minutes of what isn't possible in their personal and professional life. Whether any flour will be available to make bread, where it might be found, how much of it is available and how much it will cost. Rich or poor, taxi drivers, human rights defenders and teachers alike spend hours speculating about where a canister of cooking gas might be found. Even to the point that ambulance drivers now decide whether or not to respond to an emergency call based on dwindling gas availability in the cars. It's a tragic situation that requires something to be done immediately. As previously other people have spoken, the Israeli government, it's part of the collective punishment and ethnic cleansing that one could call it exactly ethnic cleansing. 1.5 million Gaza populations have been subjected to this kind of treatment. So we need to stand and say enough is enough on humanitarian basis, not just purely on religious or some political reasons. Not as on humanitarian reasons, this blockade must end and end now. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Ira Chernis, who is with the professor of religious studies at CU Boulder. Ira?
Thank you. I'm here today representing two groups. Colorado Jews for a Just Peace is a Jewish group based here in Boulder. Brit Tzedek V'Shalom is a national group of Jews. Both of these groups represent the large movement of Jews around the world and in Israel who are speaking out in conscience against the terrible disaster in Gaza and speaking out in favor of peace and a just solution which will provide peace and security for Israel, and also peace, security, and a just resolution of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people as well. And the silver lining here is that the number of Jews who are understanding the need to support Palestinian rights as well as Jewish security, that number of Jews is growing so rapidly in recent years. I want to read a statement by Rabbi Tirza Firestone of Boulder, who had hoped to be here today, but a previous engagement kept her elsewhere. But she wants to share these words with us. Not everyone in the Jewish community has been silenced by the tacit embargo on words regarding Israel's Gaza policy. There are many among us who love Israel deeply, want to see it flourish as a sovereign state, and are appalled by its government's human rights abuses. Well, the situation is indeed complex, and there are those in Gaza who do employ terrorist tactics. Holding innocent civilians hostage without power, clean water, or adequate medical care quite simply runs counter to Jewish law and ethics. Ironically, what is occurring in Gaza today is all too similar to what we Jews suffered under the Roman occupation 2,000 years ago. During that time, Jews starved to death in the impenetrable cage of Rome's siege around Jerusalem. Then, too, it was a band of minority Jewish extremists who decided to fight to the death, even though the vast majority of civilians wanted no harm. Horrendous atrocities ensued, which are chronicled and remembered well by the Jewish community around the world. Again and again, I ask myself, how can we, who have suffered so unutterably throughout our history, now be perpetrators of the same kind of suffering, especially when our most preciously held principles guide us to promote life at all costs, because the divine spark lives in every human being. That's the statement from Rabbi Tirza Firestone of Boulder. There's also a statement by the chairs of the Rabbinic Cabinet of Brit Tzedek V'Shalom. This Rabbinic Cabinet is about 900 rabbis across the country who are speaking out against the excesses of the Israeli government, and these rabbis are calling on the Israeli government to renew the ceasefire with Hamas, to lift the siege, and to make sure that the people of Gaza are treated humanely. There's also in Israel a very heartening movement of young people, high school seniors, who are legally obliged to go into the army, but are refusing to go into the army because they will not be part of an army of occupation. One of them writes that the most dangerous thing in Palestine is the Israeli soldiers, the very people who are supposed to be on my side. This young woman and many others like her are going to jail rather than serving in that occupation. They are known, their movement is known as the Sheministim, and December 18th is a worldwide day of support for the Sheministim. So there are these Jewish voices of conscience, motivated some by religious concerns, some by deep moral concerns, all by their deep love of Israel and what it should be at its best, which requires them also to speak out on behalf of the Palestinian people.